Hi friends, it's Anne here, and today's video is my third update for my Pan That palette for 2022. I'm actually doing two palettes for this year. I'm doing an eyeshadow palette and a face palette. The eyeshadow palette that I'm doing is the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette. So first off, we'll just talk about this palette and what's going on, and there's Pan! Yay! We have new Pan! So hopefully you can see it there. It's in this shade called White Chocolate. And actually, I'll throw up a picture when I actually first hit pan because it was like my favorite kind of pan. It was surprise pan. So I knew I was getting kind of close to the bottom, but I wasn't really expecting to hit pan. I was thinking it was going to take a while. And I use the shadow. I use it mostly just like as an all over base or like blending like up into the crease. And I was doing some other things, and then you see that glint out of the corner of your eye, and I was like, oh, is that pan? And I looked closer, and it was pan. It was a teeny tiny pan, but it was pan. So I was pretty excited to have a little surprise pan this month. And I'll throw up the photo, the side-by-side photo of this. I'm pretty sure the marzipan pan is getting bigger, but no pans in anything else yet. I'm not expecting, to be honest, I'm not expecting a pan in the next month. I think it's going to be about 2 months before I see another pan. The pans that I might see, it might be in salted caramel or hazelnut. I'll put a picture like showing that on like an angle, and you can kind of see those two have pretty good dips in them. I'm taking a little page out of Danny's book. Danny, what is her channel? Danny's makeup channel, I think is what it's called. I don't realize. Danny's channel. Y'all know Danny. And she does like the amount of use for each pan. So I'm going to start trying to do that. I'm not doing that for like everything, but in this case, I want to try and do usage on this palette specifically. So going through the shades, Gilded Ganache I used 2 times. White Chocolate I used 18 times. Salted Caramel I used 4 times. Marzipan I used 5 times. Semi-Sweet I used 8 times. Hazelnut I used 7 times. Creme Brulee I used once. Haute Chocolate I didn't use at all. Milk Chocolate I used 3 times. So I kind of divide this by 2 sides. I hope that makes sense. Milk Chocolate I used 3 times. Black Forest Truffle I used twice. Triple Fudge I didn't use at all. Strawberry Bonbon I used 4 times. Candy Violet I used once. Amaretto I used once. Cherry Cordial I used once, and Champagne Truffle I used 8 times. So yeah, you can see by the numbers I definitely used the one side more so than the other side. Overall, pretty happy with my progress on that palette. And then the face palette that I'm working on is this Hourglass Lighting Edit Volume 4. And no pan. I think it's gonna be a while till we see pan, especially the way that I use this. It's gonna take a while. And then like I'll show the side by side. You're not gonna really see any sort of difference on the side by side, but I'll throw up another picture from the angle, and I think from the angle you can really see the difference, especially like the one blush that I don't use is the middle blush, and it's like really domed up, and like it's fairly like original shaped, whereas like particularly the top row is very flat. So I'm definitely like working through that top row, but it's taking its time. I feel like these are very light, like they're very finely milled and very light powders, so you don't use a lot compared to some powders that are a bit heavier and thicker. I am weighing this palette, which I'm not weighing my eyeshadow palette because my eyeshadow palette is too heavy for my jewelry scale, so I'm just not even bothering, but I am weighing this. So far, so good. Last year, my face palette went like all over the place, so I stopped weighing it. But anyway, last month this was 137.1 grams. It's now 136.81 grams, so that's a difference of 0.29 grams. Since the beginning of the year, I've used 0.98 grams. So I've used almost a gram of product, which I think is really good. I don't know what the total amount of product is in this. Again, 1 gram of product seems like pretty small for this, but I'm really mostly just focusing on these two right now. I kind of dip into this and this every once in a while. Clearly I'm not using this a whole lot. I might use this a bit more now that it's getting warmer out. It's very, to me, like a spring summery type color. But yeah, like I'm working through it. It's going to take its time, and I'm okay with that. So the other part of this project is like a roulette type project, and I am going to talk about the palettes that I picked last month. So I'm just kind of going through this through the order that I've got them sitting here in the little pile. So the first one, oh, it's fallen off. The first one is this little quad from the Color Workshop. It's from a Christmas set that I got a couple years ago, and I pleasantly surprised. I only used this the once, and I used this in my panning punk video, and it turned out really good. I used all 4 shades. That's all I used on my eyes was this, and I used the 4 shades. I did wet this shade a little bit to get a bit like more oomph to it. But yeah, like I was pleasantly surprised at how well that look turned out. I'm always surprised by these little guys. I mean, they do take effort. You have to really build it. Like there's not a lot of pigment in these, but I don't know, for like the average person, I feel like it's usable and it's wearable. And this is like, the colors are very different from anything else that I have. Actually, would be really nice to try it out again because it would match my hair now. That's dumb. I should have tried it since I did my hair. I haven't tried it since I did my hair. Anyway, it's not like it's going anywhere. I can always play with it later. The next palette is the Urban Decay Naked Basics palette. This is like the number 1 palette. And I used every single shade in this. I use this generally in conjunction with other palettes. I don't think I ever wore this on its own. I keep saying I need to repress this. I can't really use this shade the way it is. It's super awkward, so I do need to repress that. So I'm going to keep this palette out because I want to repress this shortly. Probably repress this when I repress my blush that I was talking about in my Project Pan. So yeah, I mean, this is another palette that maybe someday I bring back as a Pan That palette because I think it's doable. I mean, the thing with these though is they're very hard pressed, so it takes a long time to go through these. But it's a good palette to like pair with other palettes, if that makes sense. The next palette I just want to talk about is the Colourpop Wild Nothing palette. I really enjoy this palette. I wore this a lot. I did not take a lot of pictures when I wore this, mostly because, as you can see, it's a pretty light palette. Like, even the camera's like, oh my god, it's so bright. The colors are really light, so I feel like from a photographing or even filming perspective, it doesn't look great, but from an everyday perspective, this is great. I was doing a lot of going out this past month, just for various reasons, and like not really going out like partying, but like interacting with people outside of my house. It sounds so lame. And I was trying to think of like makeup looks that would look really refined but pretty, and I went to this palette a lot for that, and I really enjoyed it for that because I felt like I could make pretty looks that weren't going to be like, oh my god, she's wearing a lot of makeup, what's going on, but still was like, oh, like her look looks really pretty. That's what I kind of go for when I use this palette. I'm pretty sure I used everything in this palette. I also did a really nice look. Again, I don't think it showed up. I don't know if I took a picture, but I took Come Together all over the lid, and then if you sheer this color over top, which is Seashells, which kind of has this greeny hint to it. It's kind of a sheer color. You can see it there. You get this really, really beautiful look, like so pretty. I really enjoyed that. So I really, really enjoyed playing with this palette. This is a palette that like, I mean, you don't get a lot of variety, and again, I'm not going to get a lot of intensity. Like if I want to wear a look that's like really interesting or intense, I'm not getting that. But if I want something that's like easy every day that I don't have to think about, this is a palette that's a go-to for me. The next palette that I had is the Starry Eyes to Hypnotize palette from Charlotte Tilbury. I really enjoy this palette, although I'm going to say I'm not creative at all with it. I basically did a look with each of the trios. I think the first look I did was with this one. This is probably my favorite trio. It's the one that I'm drawn to the most, which I find interesting that I like it more than this one. I just do. I think I'd like this one a bit better if it was a bit more cool tone, just to give it a difference from this one. I feel like they're almost too same. And again, these are really nice. This shade, I think I talked about this before. I feel like I've talked about this before, but this shade, I don't know, like it doesn't have a shade name. It's just the first shade in this trio. It is like magical fairy dust in an eyeshadow. I don't know how to explain it. And it won't show up, like, it doesn't really show up in like a swatch, especially in like natural light. But if I'm in like indoor lighting, like in my bathroom, and you can see all the little like twinkly lights in the shadow, and it's so, so pretty. I just absolutely love that shadow. It is so pretty. It's so, like, it doesn't look like anything. Like, when I'm swatching it there, it's like, it doesn't really look like anything. But when you have it on the eyes, and I think in conjunction with, like I said, I'm not creative with this palette for some reason. I got lazy, I guess. Just use it with these shadows. But I think the sparkle of this, in contrast to the sort of deepness of this, just works out really, really well. It's a really well thought out trio on that side. So yeah, and then again, I did one with the green as well. It's an okay green. I like that it's more of a muted green, so it's not too in your face green. I feel like it's a green that anybody can wear. And then the last palette, and I talked about this in my last video that I wasn't too impressed by getting this. However, it actually worked out okay. I feel like this palette, it's interesting. When you look at it and you think, oh bam, like there's a lot of color going on. But when you actually start using the shadows, I feel like they're actually a little more muted than what they appear to be. And what I ended up doing with this palette, I know I didn't use all of the shades. I know I didn't use the 2 yellows. But I used most of the rest of it, I think. I don't know if I used Tidal Wave, to be honest. But yeah, I think I used pretty much everything else at some point. And yeah, I just feel like this palette it's not nearly as in your face. It's just because it's a lot of color together. But once you start separating it out, it's not so intense. And then what I was doing was taking like the Naked Basics palette or my Too Faced palette and combining it with this. So I would just like, what I did with one look was I took Flip Flops on the lid and then I mixed Beach Ball with a brown to sort of dull this down a little bit. And I thought it looked really, really nice. I actually love Flip Flops. Flip Flops is like an amazing shade and it looks so dumb that, like, again, another shade that when I swatch it here, it's not going to look like anything, but in person, if you can see this shade, so it's just sort of like this, I don't know, I call it like a sandy color, but then it's got these little teal iridescence in it, like these just tiny little teal iridescence, and then when you put it on the lid, and then again, combining it with another shade that's got some teal in it to like pull it out, in person, it just looks so pretty. I was like, oh my gosh, I love that shade, Flip Flops. Another shade that I really love is Seashell. A lot of people might not like it. It's very sheer. It's definitely a topper shade, but it just adds a bit of lightness, a bit of sparkle to just an ordinary look, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how I was using this palette, and I was quite surprised that I enjoyed using it like that. Again, it took a bit of work. I had to really think about it, which is one reason why it's like, oh, this palette's a bit, you have to really think about it, but at the same time, I was pleasantly surprised that this was not nearly as kind of scary to use, if that makes sense. Granted, I know, like, sorry, I just need to wipe off my hands. I know, like, Misty from Misty Pants didn't like this palette, and I can see why not. The pigmentation is not super intense, and I think compared to, like, I've got that little snack size one, I don't know what they call it, the little bite size one from Violet Voss. I feel like the pigmentation of that one is more intense than the pigmentation of the mattes in this one. And yeah, like I feel like if you're looking at this, you're expecting to get these really bold, bright colors, and they're not as bold and bright as what they look like. I think that's why I actually like it. It's not nearly as scary to me to use this palette, but it helps me play with color and incorporate color in just like an everyday look without feeling too, it sounds really dumb, but because my hair is so colorful now, I'm somewhat afraid of looking too clownish, but at the same time, it's like, fuck it, I like makeup, so I don't care. So I kind of like bounce between like trying to do something a bit more neutral, kind of like I have something fairly neutral today, and then something a bit brighter, because my hair is so bright now. I don't know, I'm still trying to deal with, it's different having such like dramatic hair. I'm not used to it. So those were the March picks. Now let's move on to the April picks. So I'm doing my picks for this project full roulette style, which has its pros and cons, but because I'm picking so much, it seems to work out okay. There's enough shadows, and because my Pan That palette is pretty neutral, that I can sort of make it work, but I do comment, like the Violet Voss one, it's like, it's not quite in season, or it's not quite what I was feeling at the time, but we're just rolling with it. So I'm doing the little Tiny Decisions app for this, and when I did the first pick, it picked out the Tarteist Pro To Go palette, which I was actually pleasantly surprised that this was pulled, because I am going home for Easter in April, and this will be perfect for that. This is my go-to travel palette. It doesn't have a whole lot of usage out of it, to be honest, but it is, for me, a go-to travel palette, especially when I go home. It is on the, I'm gonna drop my palettes here. Let's put this down. It is on the warm side a little bit, which I'm surprised I like this so much, because I'm not a huge, like, for this just to be an exclusive warm, or an exclusive travel palette for me, I would prefer if it's like a bit more balanced in cools and warms, but it's not super, like you've got these two colors that are warm, and then I would say and maybe this one. But then I'd say these three are kind of neutral. Like these three right here are fairly neutral-ish. They're not too warm. But yeah, I really enjoy this palette for travel. Camera does not want to focus on it. There we go. It's a great little palette. I think it's still available for sale, but I would recommend if you're going to get it, like get it on sale. I say that for everything though. Like, that's just like blanket advice. Don't pay full price. So then the next thing that the Tiny Decisions app pulled up was another mini palette. It was the Viseart Petite Pro palette, which ironically, now that I look at this, I feel like it has some similarities to the Tarte Pro To Go. Like I feel like these two colors right here are similar to one of the shimmers. Like the other shimmer in the Pro To Go would fit in the middle. And then this is a bit more reddish, but there's like a reddish color, and then you've got the browns. Like it's they could be cousins. They're related. Not sisters, maybe. A little too far apart to be sisters. Well, I don't know. Some sisters don't look anything alike. But yeah, I feel like they're, interestingly enough, very, very similar type palettes. So I think what I might actually end up doing is bringing both of these palettes home with me. When I go home, I don't wear makeup a lot. It's just a different environment, and it's with my family, and I'm like, like I wear it when I want to, but then there's some days where I wear nothing at all. So yeah, for me, like these are great little palettes to take home, because then like I'm not overwhelmed, it's not too bright or crazy colorful, and I don't have to think too hard to use either one of these palettes. So if I want to throw something on, I can throw it on, and if I don't, I don't. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about getting both of those. And I'm happy actually now that like I'm looking at them and I feel like they're very similar. I want to see how similar they actually are when I use them. The next palette that I picked out was the Rimmel Magnify Eyes Crimson Edition palette. I feel like, or I remember this was maybe a dupe for the Naked Cherry palette. I'm glad I never bought that because I feel like this is a palette I'm not super drawn towards. I've talked about this. I've done some specific videos on this, at least one on this palette, and it's a one note type palette, and it's those kind of reddy pinks that can make you look sick if you're not careful with how you use it. And yeah, like I'm glad I didn't buy the cherry palette because it was more expensive, and I don't get a whole lot of use out of this palette. This is a palette I could see myself potentially decluttering, maybe depotting a couple of shades and then decluttering, because out of all of my palettes, it's probably one of the least ones that I'm drawn to as an individual palette. Again, maybe if this was split out with like, or mixed with another palette, I'd like the shades a little bit better. I just feel like it's a bit intense. Like these two shades on camera, like they almost look identical looking at these on camera. And same with like over here, like these two kind of look the same. Well, it's kind of like all the same in here. So there's not a lot of variety in this. But I'm interested in playing with it because again, it's not one that I'm drawn to regularly. It's not one that I pull out regularly. Like if you were to ask me to just pick a palette, I'm probably not going to pick this. I'm just going to be honest. It's not one I'm going to pick. But I want to play with it and keep it around because it is different. It does sort of fill a gap in my collection. But I could see myself decluttering this at some point. Like I said, maybe keeping a few shades that are unique and then decluttering the actual palette. And these, from what I remember, were very good quality for the price. The other one I have is the Spice one. The fourth palette that I picked out was the Butter London palette called Natural Goddess. This would be recognizable to a lot of people if you had BoxyCharm. I'm pretty sure this was in BoxyCharm. I actually like this palette. I like these shades. I really like the shade Queen and Diva. I feel like these were really fun shades to play with. And I say this every time. I like never use this one. So I have to try and use this one this month at some point. Yeah, I don't know why. I never ever use it. I don't even know. It's not nearly, again, it's maybe not nearly as scary as I think it is. It looks a bit more muted now that I'm looking at it. And I do really like teals. The more I play with teals, the more I like them. I think I suit teals really well, if I do say so myself. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to play with this one because again, it's not one that I normally would draw it, like normally would pull out. But when I see it, I'm like, oh, I really like that. So yeah, so I'm happy with that one. And so what I'm trying to aim to do is around 5 palettes or around 50 shadows. I'm looking more at shadow numbers than actual number of palettes. And so the last palette that I pulled out was the Too Faced Gingerbread Extra Spicy palette, which I have mixed feelings about playing this out now because it is very warm tone, and because it is gingerbread, I feel like it should be in fall. But at the same time, I'm like, you know, it is pretty neutral too. Like there's really nothing too outlandish about this, other than again, there's another teal in there. I feel like a lot of these, now that I'm looking at them, there's a lot of overlap. Like definitely, even like these colors are similar to what's in the Crimson palette. That's really interesting. I did not notice that. There's a lot of overlap in these sort of palettes. Was not planned, obviously, like I said. Everything's sort of rouletted, so I get what I get. But yeah, I am excited to play with this because it is one that I feel like I don't use enough since I bought it. This is one of those palettes, like, so I bought this December 2019, and that's when I started ramping up on buying palettes, and I feel like since then, palettes that I've been buying, I like don't use enough. Palettes that I bought pre that, I feel like I've used a fair amount, but I feel like, yeah, like come mid 2019 and later, it was like palettes I just don't quite get enough use out of. So that's it. That is my Pan That Palette 2022 update number 3. If you like this video, feel free to give a little thumbs up down below. And if you haven't already, I would love it if you subscribe to my channel here in Toronto, Canada. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you sometime soon. Bye.